you have learned already with regards to productivity in an ecosystem that the energy that is taken into the body of a photosynthetic autotroph, a producer in the case of a terrestrial ecosystem, is going to be a measure of productivity. So if you only take into account that which remains in the body of a plant, after you subtract from that energy, the energy that was used for the metabolic uses of the plant, that is going to be the net primary production. Now, we're going to be considering another part of productivity in an ecosystem, which is known as secondary production. As you have learned all along in biology, organisms like plants, which are photosynthetic autotrophs, are producers, and we call them producers not because they're producing energy. Remember that the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but we call them producers because they are producing food. They are producing chemical molecules that can also be available to other members in an ecosystem. So now let's take a look at what happens when a herbivore comes and eats a plant. Of all of that energy that is consumed from the plant and remains in the body of the consumer, that is either the herbivore or other higher levels of consumers in a food chain, that is going to be known as secondary production. One concept we want to explore right from the beginning is going to be the concept of assimilation. Assimilation efficiency deals with the energy that is extracted from the food consumer eats. Here we have in this illustration a caterpillar. And this caterpillar, you can see it in this picture, is eating plant material, a leaf to be precise. Notice that the total amount of plant energy consumed is going to be 200 joules. However, half of that energy is not taken into the body or used by the caterpillar. Half of that energy, 100 joules to be precise in this illustration, is going to be discarded by the animal in the form of feces. These 100 joules are going to be energy that is not assimilated. And so if we are looking at this measure of assimilation efficiency, the caterpillar will be assimilating these two forms of energy. The energy that is used for cellular respiration, 67 joules, plus 33 joules that are used for building into the body of the animal, which is going to be new biomass or secondary production. So what amount of energy was actually assimilated by the animal? 33 joules plus 67 joules. That's going to be a total of 100 joules. But that's only half of the total amount of energy consumed by the caterpillar. So we can say that the assimilation efficiency of this animal is going to be about 50%. 50% of the energy in the food consumed is going to be used for metabolic purposes or remain as secondary production for the animal, the new biomass as it continues to grow and develop. Production efficiency is going to be only the fraction of energy that is stored in food that is not used for respiration. And so if you're asking me in this illustration, we are considering right here, what exactly will be the production efficiency? It's going to be the 33 joules that stay in the body of the caterpillar as it continues to grow, or in other words, it's going to be about 33% production efficiency. Now, this is going to be of interest when you look at the various members of an ecosystem, various members of the community, because, yeah, as plants are making sugar molecules and other forms of compounds that can be a source of energy for many animals and consumers, not all of the members of an ecosystem or the community are going to be assimilating energy at the same rate or turning energy into secondary productivity. And so if you look at this table that I'm introducing in this illustration, you can see, for example, the production efficiency. Now remember, we're looking at the percent of energy consumed by the animal that is now retained in the body of the animal or consumer. And so if you look at something like a mouse, only about 4% of the energy they consume in food actually stays in the form of tissues and muscles and other parts of the body of the animal. Voles are another type of rodent. So you look at these animals, they only have a production efficiency of about 2.63%. If you look at fish in general, fishes, because we're looking at different species of fish, they have production efficiency of about 10%. And those numbers are still not all that good in terms of adding productivity to an ecosystem or keeping energy that may be available for other trophic levels higher up in the food chain. If you look at insects, on the other hand, Orthoptera, these are going to be animals like grasshoppers. Hemipterans, these are going to be the true bugs. Other insects, perhaps beetles can be included over here. Those are going to have production efficiencies of 41%. And so if you want to think about, hey, what types of consumers, what kinds of herbivores actually can help retain some of the energy as secondary productivity and make that available to higher levels of consumers in a food chain, insects actually happen to be important members of a community from a food chain point of view as providing energy to other levels. Microorganisms, interestingly, are going to have production efficiencies that are going to be relatively high as well. Now, something really catches my attention because I began talking about this table by mentioning mice and voles, which are rodents. And if you look at other mammals, like mammals in general, and when you look at birds, oh my goodness, birds only have a 1.26 production efficiency. What does that tell you about the amount of energy that will be available to the next trophic level for consumers that are feeding on mammals and birds? Well, not that very much energy, right? And so you may be asking, why is it that very little of the energy a mammal consumes or a bird consumes actually is retained in the tissues and cells of the body of those organisms? The answer is going to be in the high cost of endothermy. Endothermy, if you recall, when we talked about homeostasis in animals, endothermy is the ability of an animal to use its own internal heat sources to maintain a steady, constant temperature. And if you remember from class, there are two groups of organisms that are going to be in general endotherms, and that is going to be mammals and birds. So these low production efficiency numbers on the table tell you that there is a high cost of endothermy. There's a high cost in terms of energy, in terms of keeping a steady temperature in the body of these animals. Now, what does that mean in terms of energy that is available in a food chain? So we're looking at ecology. And I told you that one important dynamic in an ecosystem is going to be the way in which energy flows. So for an ecosystem, one of the themes an ecologist will want to study is going to be the concept of trophic efficiency or feeding efficiency. This trophic efficiency is going to be the percentage of secondary production or primary production, if we begin all the way down here with plants, the percentage of production that is going to be available from one trophic level to the next trophic level. Now, the numbers you see here in this illustration are going to be averages for land ecosystems. Aquatic ecosystems have a different set of dynamics, but let's look at terrestrial or land ecosystems. Consider, for example, the amount of energy taken up by a plant by the process of photosynthesis. Here we're looking at 1 million joules of sunlight. How much of that energy actually goes into the primary productivity of a plant? On average, only about 100%. That's going to be 10,000 joules. So a lot of energy that plants are using is not actually captured and kept into the body of a plant. And so here, let's begin at this point. Let's begin with the primary producers. Out of all the light they absorbed and applied for photosynthesis, we're beginning with 10,000 joules of energy in the tissues of the plant. Here comes an insect, a herbivore, feeding on the plant, and out of all of this energy, the 10,000 joules, this insect now is going to capture only 1,000 joules in terms of energy into its own body. What is the percentage of energy that has now disappeared from this food chain, that has been used maybe in terms of metabolic reactions or maybe in the form of feces and wastes? 90% of the energy has now become unavailable. Only 10% of the energy available in the plant has now remained in the body of this insect. Now, here comes a rodent, and the rodent is going to be feeding on this insect. This rodent will capture into its body only 10% of that energy. So only 100 joules of energy of the 1,000 consumed in the body of the insect will still remain in the body of this rodent. And what does that tell you when the predator for this rodent comes, like in the form of a red-tailed hawk, and it eats this rodent? Only 10% of that energy, only 10% out of 100, which is 10 joules, will be available. So on land ecosystems, as you can see, as energy goes from one trophic level, like let's say producers, to the primary consumers, only 10% of the energy on average will be available. And as you go higher up in the trophic levels of this food chain, 10% remains, and then 10% of the previous 10% remains. Every step of the way, about 90% of the energy becomes unavailable. It cannot be remaining in that food chain. And so this has significant implications. If you look at this number here, only about 0.1% of the chemical energy fixed in photosynthesis will be available to a tertiary consumer. That is significant. As I said, this has important applications and implications when it comes to our growing human population and the demands for food and energy. There are people, there are economists, who are now daring to suggest, based on this kind of data, that it will be 10 times more effective feeding the human population if we had a diet based on plants. You are hearing correctly. There are people that are suggesting that we will be needing less land and we will be able to provide more food and better nutrition if we provided for our bodies only a vegetarian type of a diet. And again, think for a moment, what is the basis for that? If we as humans, if we were the primary consumers, the ones that are feeding on plant material, we will be able to get 10 times more energy than what we do when we consume something like meat, when we're consuming the energy that is available in the body of a primary consumer. And so I do wonder if there'll be a time or a situation in which humans would have to switch from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet. And I want to tell you, it wouldn't be the worst thing that can happen to humans. There are actually many benefits and advantages of having a plant-based diet, or what people may call vegetarians. Therefore, the idea is not outlandish. You can see here the basis for how realistically, yes, 1 unit of area, 1 acre of land would supply 10 times more energy for a human population in the form of vegetables rather than in the form of meat. And that is what I would be, that is exactly where I'm going to be concluding this presentation on the energy dynamics in an ecosystem. I hope you've had a good time learning about biology and that these concepts are making sense now that you have learned so much about metabolism and cells, and now we're looking at the highest levels of organizations such as the communities and ecosystems. Goodbye.